A Brown County judge heard arguments today on a civil lawsuit about that bonfire explosion that injured multiple Pulaski-area teens. As we previously reported, the incident happened back in 2022 in the town of Maple Grove in Shawano County when a large barrel of flammable liquid was thrown on a bonfire at a party, causing an explosion. 18-year-old Samuel Armstrong was sentenced to 6 months in jail after pleading no contest to 13 charges of causing injury by negligent handling of a dangerous weapon, explosives, or fire. Today in court, parties argued whether what happened that night was a covered accident or if it was a risk that any reasonable person should have seen coming. Lawyers for the insurance company arguing throwing a barrel of fuel on a fire was clearly a disaster waiting to happen. But lawyers for the teens and their parents say what matters is the blast itself and that nobody expected it.
Objectively, reasonably, you can't throw 20 gallons of petroleum distillate on a fire and not anticipate you're going to have a big flare up of that fire with kids ringed around it.
It was unexpected, it was unintended. The barrel, not the accelerant direct, the barrel was put on the fire with the thought that the barrel would melt and the accelerant would seep out of it.
The judge is expected to issue a written ruling in the coming weeks.